Some of it's kind of crazy. Although I will say, you can really tell good old Mathematosis and his arch nemesis of context sensitivity. You can really tell with that game and also with Death Stranding, which I played not long after Tears of the Kingdom. Those games are like really buckling under the weight of not the hardware that we play games on not really being able to keep up with the software that and the games that devs want to do. And you can really feel that in Tears of the Kingdom. It is kind of insane how we've advanced so much in terms of like software and graphics and engines and all these cool things that we're able to do with that. But we have like ever since the DualShock 2, we've never really advanced in that. And that came out like 20 years ago. It's like how, in terms of controls, how we've, with the exception of like maybe the Nintendo Wii, we've never advanced upon the DualShock ever since Ape Escape came out. That's crazy. And it's starting to become pretty detrimental to the games industry because devs don't seem to be able to pull off the things that they want to do. And I also think it's a problem because like the counter argument people might have to that is just like, oh well, the PC gaming master race or VR, that'll be our savior. That'll give devs the hardware that they need to be able to do all this cool and interesting stuff. But even that, it's strange that like, well, keyboard and mouse might be able to solve that problem because you got so many buttons on a keyboard and mouse, and I'm just like wrong. Actually, look down at your hands for a moment with a keyboard and mouse. So you got your left hand, 5 fingers. Let's be honest, you're only really using WASD, maybe the number keys, and you might alternate between Q, E, R. And you might use your pinky and your thumb for spacebar, shift, and control. And then with your right hand, that only leaves you with your mouse buttons, 1, 2, and if you're an insane person, 3. And then like mouse cursor controls, which in some situations that will actually leave you with even less buttons than what a controller will offer. So no, like a keyboard and mouse isn't even the solution to that. And with VR, even again with VR, you still have that same amount of buttons on, or less so, than on each of the Joy-Con controllers. And I'm not sure how much like inputs you can get out of the VR headset itself. So like it's strange. The only like hardware advancement I can think of in like the past 20 years was what do you call it? It's when they use it for the Switch and handheld Nintendo games. The haptic feedback, yeah, okay, yes, that's an improvement, but it's quite small. It's quite like I don't know how old you are. Yeah, the gyro stuff with the PS5 controllers, that is an improvement, and it is interesting tech, but it's kind of a small improvement in comparison to, say, I don't know how old you are, Chili, but I don't think people my age, in like our early 20s or whatever, really appreciate how much of an advancement the analog stick was for the gaming industry. Like adding an analog stick, you're 33. Okay, adding an analog stick, that was huge in the Nintendo 64 era. That was huge for the gaming industry because without it, and let's be honest, like if you ever played a PlayStation 1 game, the reason why most of them are kind of jank is because for 3D environments, you kind of need an analog stick, almost. Like, people like B or Charlie, or maybe you yourself, are who grew up with a PlayStation 1 are probably going like, well, I can use a D-pad for these types of games, and I'm fine with it. But honestly, like, if you grew up, if you're my age and you grew up with consoles that had built-in analog sticks, going back to anything that used the D-pad exclusively, it's like going back from cell phones to carrier pigeons. You know, it's such a leap backwards in technology, and it feels awful. Like you're probably like B and Charlie would be like shaking their heads at me. It's just sort of like, ah, you're excluding yourself from so many great old games. You're right, and that's like, that's probably the reason where like Charlie would go be like, why can't people wrap their heads around tank controls or whatever? Because like, muscle memory is a really, really powerful thing. I don't think these 30-something guys realize how much muscle memory can just brute force through bad controls. And I'm gonna be honest, like, most PlayStation 1 games had bad controls. You don't realize that because you're so used to it. Like, I remember I was talking to a B, and like a big reason why I wasn't too fond of the earlier Metal Gear games is because the controls gave me hives. And B was just sort of like, well, I can't imagine it any way else, any other way. Yeah, because you grew up with it, but that's clearly not the case because Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5 were able to pull off a much more cohesive controls and reliable control scheme, to the point where like certain parts of that game couldn't really handle it. Because if you played Metal Gear Solid 4, that game features bosses that are reminiscent of the prior games. Like, you get to fight Vamp again, and it's pretty much exactly the same as fighting him in Metal Gear Solid 2, but it's so obvious that boss is really not built for you to be able to move and shoot at the same time. And isn't quite sure how to handle that. It's just a day. I didn't play much 3D PlayStation 1 games with the D-pad or weird setups. I missed Apescape. Played mostly Spyro and racing games. Well, Spyro's a fairly chilled out game, so and I could play Spyro with a D-pad, but Crash is like a nightmare because of how bad it is to play Crash with an analog stick, as the remake found out, and how sure. Oh dear. And how, like, I'm sorry because I never have that. I don't have that muscle memory. Playing with a D-pad for movement controls is just awful. And even Crash 4 kind of struggles with that a little bit, where although that game has more of a problem of like, it's kind of hard to, the environments can be so cluttered that and I love the way that game looks, but even I'll acknowledge the environments can be so cluttered that it can be hard to tell what is and isn't a platform that I can jump on and what's just background. Yeah, I think the gaming industry is in desperate need of an advancement in hardware, and the only thing that we've really gotten is the Nintendo's, I think it's called gyro aim from the handhelds and the Switch and the Wii U, and the PlayStation 5's haptic feedback and like the triggers that can like hold and push you back. That's kind of cool. But those are kind of like minor advancements in comparison to how revolutionary the analog stick was. Like, the analog stick changed everything.